You can hear me? Yeah. Okay. Thank you for coming back. Thank you for having me. Thank you for curating such a thoughtful and provocative. Yes, we met in Boston. I think so. Yes, at your place. I think we have some mutual friends. It's not unusual that people with similar concerns, similar heartache, similar pressures somehow rise to the surface. And so, yeah, thank you all for having me. My name is Nida Sinnokrot. Nida Sinnokrot. I think it's important for us to unpack a little bit of our positionality and where we're coming from. I am Palestinian. My parents, when they were refugees, found themselves in Algeria. So I grew up in Algeria before studying in the United States and then moving back to Palestine. One of the most important people in my life, in my childhood in Algeria, was Bakhta. She was a family friend in Amazigh. And I think being an artist is very much owed to the conflicts she instilled in my imagination around technology and mythology. At one point, my father had this amazing Minolta camera, and he pointed the camera in her direction to take a picture. And she freaked out. She, had a moment of resistance that was incredibly powerful, and she said that the camera can steal your soul. This resonates with some of what we've been hearing about violence and representation. And as a child, I think I was 11 years old at that point, that night, I took apart my father's camera because I wanted to release the soul. Of course, I got in trouble for this, but this has never left me, and this has been my approach to unpacking the violence of representation at the hands of colonial gaze, at the hands of certain technologies, and asking myself, can mythologies be used as a curative, as protectionism? Is there an aesthetic of protection that maybe can be leveraged through the way we work? So I am going to maybe quickly survey some of my practice from filmmaking, where I'm classically trained, to farming, which is what I do in Palestine for the most part. So maybe one question that we could ask ourselves is, what happens when modern technologies encounter older cosmologies? This is the question that Bakhta put in my mind. When I took apart that camera, I found this piece of little apparatus. This little techne is called the Geneva mechanism. And this is used to regulate time. It eliminates variation. It introduces standardization and replicable sequencing. And I find this to be one of the sources of the violence that we were speaking about earlier. This Geneva mechanism is found, of course, in every projector, camera, and early machine guns. So we can trace, no technologies are neutral, of course, and so we can trace these lineages, and my practice tends to take things apart to try to uncover their souls, uncover that spirit, and put things together in new ways, make new machines, make new mythologies. So my earlier works are called horizontal cinema. And this was my response to having grown up with the very palpable understanding of how violent representation can be as a Palestinian. And I was questioning every aspect of these technologies and searching for equivalent mythologies through which to navigate these terrains. Here in horizontal cinema, you see 3 projectors where I remove the Geneva mechanism. And the film is a loop. It doesn't have a beginning and an end, and it runs horizontally instead of vertically through multiple light sources instead of singular point of view. So this also resonates with Laura Mulvey's kind of feminist film critique about power and hegemony. So in this particular version, this is at Kiosk in Ghent, it's called When Her Eyes Lifted, and it shows a woman walking across a space and opening a very large factory door through a chain pulley system. You can see her here. So that idea of the shutter, you know, and the mechanism that is very binary, light, dark, in this incessant repetitive sequence, is interrupted here as the film moves anywhere from 0 to over 100 frames per second, depending on the audience, the positionality of you relative to the screen, and you relative to other people in the audience. So it's a very bizarre kind of experience where you feel like you are both distanced, and yet a source, you know, of causality in what you see and what you hear. The woman here, of course, opening this door changes the room from dark to light and back from dark to light. And with every movement and every step, the film is disintegrating. So there's thousands of little scratches that accumulate across the body, across the machine, across the chain link fence that pulls you up and down like a marionette. So these ideas of visibility, invisibility, power, positionality all come to play in what I was calling horizontal cinema. And this informs my work in land-based practice as well. These ideas of needing to create new mythologies and new technologies comes from a deep belief that there can be no sustainable technology without a sustainable mythology. And again, an implement here of destruction and trauma in Palestine is the bulldozer. And so I have a series of works called Ka, which references an Egyptian kind of spirit hieroglyph that embodies contradiction. It's not like the yin and yang, but it's not dissimilar at the same time. And the idea is that it can hold contradiction, and contradiction is reified and deified in this way. So here you have these bulldozer arms that have been turned upside down, the refusal of digging into this kind of, you know, kind of position, where they embrace contradiction, and of course they imitate one another in this bizarre kind of mimesis or performance of imitation, of power. And here you have an Israeli bulldozer and a Palestinian bulldozer kind of facing each other. And you can read this in their scarred, tattooed surface. There's little glimpses of maybe Hebrew, there's glimpses of English, there's glimpses of Arabic in their surface. This particular one is called Ka Oslo. This is 2017. It's permanently installed at the Palestinian Museum in Birzeit. And forgive me for showing a cover of a magazine, but I thought it was important to also mention that the editor of this magazine at the time, David Velasco, was laid off not too long after, a few short years after, for his position in not celebrating or not turning a blind eye, you could say, to genocide in Palestine. So this is the little sculpture in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo that inspired this piece. It was an illegal photograph, so I apologize for its quality. Here's another example of this kind of exploration I've undertaken around standardization of time, the Geneva mechanism being time, and standardization of space. This is a shipping container, and the global flows that it mediates and regulates, and how to implicate this within, you know, the situation we find ourselves in today. This piece is called Jonah's Whale, and what I did was I found an Israeli settler caravan. So there was a point, you know, post-Oslo where there was this kind of surface kind of effort to appease certain interests, and regulations on Israeli settlement were placed. And what that meant was you couldn't build necessarily a settlement, but you could put a shipping container and call it like a domicile. And that's how it kind of got around these regulations. So I asked myself, like, when a settlement is built, like, how does it start? What's the initial seed of that settlement? And what happens is the shipping container is placed, it's made into a domicile. Once the settlement is fully fledged, what happens to it? It gets put on the black market in these liminal zones in Palestine, sold to Palestinian construction site real estate developers essentially, and then used to build another kind of mimetic relationship to land, right? So here I slice it. I slice through the carpet. I slice through the mattress. I slice through the gypsum and the electrical cables. And Jonah's whale, of course, refers to this kind of biblical myth of the prophet Jonah escaping. He has an obligation to God, but doesn't want to go, wants to go to the beach instead, and goes to Tel Aviv, goes to Jaffa. And because of this, God punishes him from escaping his obligatory debt. A whale swallows Jonah. This is the punishment, until Jonah repents, right, from the belly of the whale. And these are the questions I'm asking myself. Where do these myths that oppress us, how do they become so unquestioned, you know? And many of them come to these kind of creation mythologies or Abrahamic mythologies that I wish to expose by slicing through them. I always cut through things the same way I used to cut through film with a guillotine, you know, analog filmmaking. Here it is in Cologne in St. Peter's Cathedral. And Mass was performed in Jonah's whale. So from kind of works that represent to works that enact. This piece is called Flight Jalazon. So what you see here is the Jalazon refugee camp. The residents of the refugee camp are from the coastal area of Palestine. And they are now north of Ramallah, landlocked. So they are trapped, they are removed from their ancestral relationship to the sea. In Flight Jalazon, well, I should say that pigeon fancying, you know, this time-honored, almost kind of religious pursuit of rearing pigeons, training pigeons, trading pigeons. You know, they're very sacred. Pigeons have always had a sacred place in Palestine as mediators between earth and sky, as communication devices, as aspirational devices, as symbols of freedom, but also symbols of war, right? There's a tarmihim bihijaratin min sijil, you know, this idea that a liberation may come from the birds that also resist oppression, and the birds will drop stone from the sky, you know, on the oppressor. So it's a very storied relationship, and for I think it was this 2017 Columbia International Biennial, the theme was "The Sea is Mine," and I wanted to do two things. I wanted to bring the sea to this landlocked population, and I was also at the same time very interested in creating new constellations, new ways to imagine, new stories, new mythologies, and new ways to navigate, new ways to get our bearings. So I figured, well, we need new constellations to do this. And these constellations cannot be permanent. They must be ephemeral. They must be shifting. Same as this idea with the film disintegrating. I like this idea of ephemeral infrastructure. So here's a little, maybe, if it plays, or if I hit it again, it'll play. So we'll watch just this is not an artwork itself. This is a little documentation of the process. And there should be sound. We could turn the sound up if you like.
بحتاج مع حدا
So you see, I made a little jewelry for the pigeons. Pigeons are blind. They don't see at night, so we spent weeks training them to be able to fly. It's very ephemeral. They can only do this for a short amount of time. At one point, 2 pigeons got lost, and you could see them like these celestial lovers, you know. It was so heartbreaking. But they came back the next day. The other thing that's very important about this piece is that pigeon fancying is considered very low class. You're considered like a thief because they steal each other's pigeons, and pigeons are super expensive. You remember, in the Syrian war, I mean, there was a huge smuggling business. Some of these pigeons are hundreds of thousands of dollars. And you can carry pigeon eggs in your pants for up to 2 weeks, and they will still hatch. So there was an interesting New York Times article about this. At this one, it was a 2-night thing. On the first night, I managed to unite 7 families in the camp. 150 birds flew, and I got this picture. The next day, they had already started fighting with each other. That kind of the artistic truce had been broken, and that's the video that you saw with fewer families engaged. Okay. So you can see now. So this interest in kind of constellations as infrastructure, kind of migrated again to understanding how to engage with a site on a long-term basis, and this was a very temporal engagement with this site here and my art, science, agriculture residency program I established there on this hill in the village of Ankinia. Sakya Art, Science, Agriculture, which I established with my partner Sahar Kawasmi. So you can see Sakya is here. Here's the Palestinian village of Ankinia, the city of Ramallah, and it's these purple areas are Israeli settlements. And so on the one hand, you have a threat from the Israeli settlements taking over this hilltop. Any kind of vantage point that is high is considered something to occupy. And then you have that urban sprawl I had mentioned earlier with the Palestinian development encroaching in the same direction. Sakya in this area is called Area C. Area C is a designation that the Israelis have put on the vast majority of Palestine where it is administered by the Israeli military. Area A is administered by the Palestinian Authority. Area B is semi-negotiated. Ankinia is in Area B. Sakya is under full Israeli jurisdiction in Area C. That means we don't have any roads, we don't have electricity, etc., etc. So everything we do at Sakya on this hill, we do by donkey. We have two of the oldest trees in Palestine. This is the oldest tree in Palestine. It's the holy sacred oak tree. And then back here, I'll show you in a second, we have the holy shrine of the Sufi Abu al-Ainain, the father of eyes. He was a blind Sufi. And we have these historic buildings which we renovated. There's this building you see here is 109 years old, and it's built out of Roman citadel stones. And the building, there's another building that is built during British Mandate period. Now, we repair this using only traditional methods, only materials from the site. Anything we need, we transport by donkey. Everything we do by hand. The holy tree of the K-Cub, this is taken from under the holy oak, and here you have the holy spring of al-Ainain, the mother of eyes. Ain is eye in Arabic. It also means spring. And this is after we renovated the mother of springs, the holy oak, This is a celebration after its renovation. The farm that we have several fields which we cultivate, and the holy cake-up tree next to the growing over the grave of Abu al-Ainian, Father of Eyes, the Sufi saint, who we still practice rituals and travel to the site. This was under the tree was one of our first symposia, and here it's a very interesting mythology that many people, let me know if you've ever heard of this. This is the wak-wak tree, very different from the Abrahamic kind of Garden of Eden relationship to nature. The idea here is that man is born from tree. So there isn't that distance between them is non-existent. And these ideas are still, somewhere under the surface. And these are the ideas that we use as infrastructure at Sakya. So can this spirit world function as infrastructure? This is one of the questions we have. And how do we know about this spirit world? Well, I'll get to that in a second, but this is very interesting. You see this band of trees? The rest of the hill is deforested. The reason this band of trees exists, because of these two holy trees, and because the mythology with them is so strong. No one will cut these trees down. You can read the strength of the heritage and mythology by reading the vegetation in Palestine. We have an approach we called rewilding pedagogy. This is how we teach at Sakya. This is how we engage with our neighbors and undertake farming. And we also believe that to rewild our imaginations, we have to rewild our narrative structures as well as our environments. And so questions do come up, like, yes, we do need new mythologies. How do we make new mythologies? What happens if the mythology has been wiped out by epistemicide and genocide? Where do we go? Can they regenerate? Under what conditions do they regenerate? So these are some of the questions that we explore. And we use art as a methodology to do this. So as part of this kind of ephemeral infrastructure, we have taken inspiration from Dr. Tawfiq Kanaan. So at the turn of the century, Dr. Tawfiq Kanaan was a physician who studied in Germany. He went back to Palestine, and he would trade his medical practice to Palestinian peasants in exchange for the opportunity to copy their pre-Islamic folklore and amulets and talismans. This is a period in history where, collecting and ethnography and, all of these kind of ideas and material histories and were just kind of gaining in popularity. And so he gave this collection of amulets, 201 talismans and amulets, to Henry Wellcome, the Henry Wellcome Museum in the UK. And then about 10 years ago, maybe 12 years ago, they were repatriated to Palestine. So our question is, can infrastructure, those invisible technical and functional networks that govern and manage everyday life, address, as did the spirit order, the anxieties that narrate our relationship to nature and to humanity, through providing platforms that both attend to physiological needs while creating collective spaces that explore ecological narratives. So participation and relationship are central to how we create these kind of infrastructures. This is Dr. Tawfiq Kanaan, and here's an example of one of these amulets. And you can see that I take a lot of inspiration from the way this assemblage comes together. And here's a piece of garlic next to a blue stone, next to sometimes a piece of wood or a bone or something like that. And Tawfiq Kanaan very, very meticulously documented kind of the medicinal qualities, you could say, of these assemblages. So Sakya is a little bit of our renovation process. After 1967, it was forbidden, and the family left. The family who we don't own this site, is important to say. We are stewards. So we teach these kind of traditional methods. We have internship programs. Much of the village is illiterate, and yet we create jobs. Sakya has been operating for more than 10 years now. And I'm very proud to say that at the beginning, one of our, Yusuf, he's a stonemason who works with us, gorgeous voice, singer, and he is now very well respected in the village. And he just became the mayor of Ankinia. And this is because of the standing that Yusuf was able to kind of foment among the young people, and giving them kind of pride and giving them a trade and teaching them how to take care of themselves in a very otherwise hostile environment. Water witnesses. So here's an example of some of the scientific and mythological crossover we do. What you see here are these ancient technology, you could say. It's clay, unfired, so it's porous, it sweats when you put water in it, and therefore there creates an evaporative cooling effect. Here I've done a lot of research on optimizing the shape, this kind of hourglass shape, to see how wind and velocity can increase that evaporative cooling effect and also draw water from the air. I was very interested in Dr. Omar Yagi's works with the metal organic frameworks. This is the kind of science part of my practice. And how to optimize being able to draw water from arid environments with zero energy input, just using wind and the heat of the sun. These get a little bit of water, not like Omar Yagi's work, who just got a Nobel Prize for this research, by the way. But they also function symbolically. This is Juman Amil Aboud on the left, a very well-known Palestinian artist who was essential in uncovering the work of Dr. Tawfiq Kanaan and his incredible research on the spirits of every spring in Palestine. So Al Ainain has a personality, a name, a spirit, a psychological profile, you could say, as well as a spirit animal. That guards the spring and maintains the relationship with how it's used. So we have art exhibitions. This is the work of Samia Halabi, preeminent Palestinian artist. Storytelling, summer schools. We publish all the research of our artists, and that becomes the summer school textbooks for the children. And here's another example of these kind of infrastructures, ephemeral infrastructure. So in Palestine, it's not possible to have fences. So how do you bring small-scale farmers back when there's the threat that the environment poses, and it's illegal? The Israeli army doesn't like to have fences that might impede their night rounds. So we came up with this idea. It's called sonic scarecrow. And the idea is to engage with a less binary approach to, enclosure or inside and out, or what the garden means, all these ideas, which I developed much more deeply in a forthcoming book called Palestine is Not a Garden by Sternberg Press. But here you have these tiny little water vessels. I call this my first water witness, made by a Palestinian potter who inherited this craft. And little exciters that make the vessels vibrate, working in collaboration with Bint Mbareh, girl of yesterday, who's a composer and singer and artist in residence at Sakia. She created these new contemporary mythologies, and we play them through the speakers. Now you could call this like a paradigmatic artistic version of a technology that actually has a very implementable practice. You can imagine having a similar thing for small-scale worker around the world. You could pull down on a phone menu, longitude, latitude, the season, the crop, the predator that might repel, the wild boar, for example, right? And then you could play a different sound that brings them in. You can call the wild boar to till the land for you. Right, so it's scarecrow. There's scarecrow in Arabic is faza, to astonish. It's not to scare; it's to astonish. And so the idea is this becomes a hostess, complicating these ideas of inside and outside, and working with the more than human. Here you can hear one of the compositions.
أعطتني جراب دافية ولا تضلك حافية ولا تضلك حافية يا دخلتني البيت أعطتني جرابات دافية ولا تضلك حافية حافية.
Then the thunder comes in and all the pots start to vibrate, and it's I think of it as a many-headed hydra as well, which is a mythological creature that I love very much. So an example of I know we're a little bit over time, but I'm almost there. So an example of some of the teaching and some ideas on how to complicate these relationships, and maybe even speak to Alphonse's question yesterday around scale and sludge or waste. This is the Geneva mechanism, which you recognize on one side, and Reverend Moule's Earth Closet from 1827 or something like that. And my assignment to the students is you have to combine these things. What happens when you bring that regulated technique with the metabolic clock? What implication does this have, right? To our psyche, but also to the nitrogen issue, right? So what happens is you would, I love this assignment. This is the way I work. So you can read this at the level of the individual and at the level of the collective, and the solution is by rotating the toilet seat. So here the toilet is not, in the side of the room. It's not a dirty thing to be hidden. It's the throne in the center of a space. Every time somebody uses the toilet moves 1 degree. You engage with a different aspect of the relationship, of nature, right? So it's a cinematic clock measuring metabolic time. But what's so brilliant about this as well is that it distributes the fecal matter, not in a pile, but in a field in a way that really increases the rate at which it becomes usable fertilizer. Now, this is not a radical thing like we heard yesterday, right? Even in China, the night soilmen used to come around and buy your sewage. And then it would go to this island where it's processed and it would go back into that cycle. So these ideas, these kind of mythologies always carry these kind of cycles and cycles of decay and ephemerality with them. And we've, the kind of mythological machine that breaks them is the source of this kind of violence, right, and alienation. So that's an example of a toilet for Sakya, emblematic of this idea of ephemeral infrastructure. And the last one I'll show you here, these are water witnesses. This is Sharjah Biennial. Let's see if I can move forward. So again, ephemeral infrastructure, you have to plan for its destruction. And this is again, like the artistic version of the chicken coop we want to build at Sakya. And it looks like the US Capitol building. And it's done in such a way, I'm a carpenter by trade. I have a very unusual path through life. So the way I designed this is very simple. Anybody can make it. There's only straight cuts. The plans are open source, and you can scale it very easily. And the idea here is we get raided weekly by Israeli settlements and settlers, and they always destroy everything we built. We've metabolized this through this process of ephemeral infrastructure, and we celebrate the opportunity to come together and build community in rebuilding the stone walls that they take apart. And we're looking forward to being able to take a picture of the US Capitol building once they destroy it. So that's part of what's going on here, because then these objects enter a circular economy, and they go and they get sold in museums, they get shown, and that money goes to Sakya, and that's what keeps Sakya moving. And we would like it to be totally self-sufficient, but this is what's happening. This is how we're negotiating now. Those hourglass forms become water goddesses. These are pre-Islamic Canaanite goddesses made out of industrial water architecture, parts that I forge and make by hand. Sometimes there's bullhorns, and they reference gods and goddesses. And the current show at Carly Bauer right now brings many of these ideas together. It's called Above, Ground, Below, mimicking Dr. Tawfiq Kan'an's classification of the spirit world as the celestial, the earthly, and the subterranean hellish, right? These are the jinn that inhabit, the spirits that inhabit our site. And so here you have those, this is a different rendering of those birds in flight, creating different constellations, series of images. You have, there's a close-up. This also references, you might have guessed, aerial warfare and bombardment and how the sky is occupied. I take these pictures the way an astronomer would take pictures of galaxies with, it's called a stacking method. And here are stacks of close-ups on newsprint. And the audience, of course, can take these away, and that adds the audience circulating in the space. And they can take these home, reinforcing the idea of the swarm, of the birds, of this different kind of mapping and logic, right? These are called rubber-coated rocks, which I started maybe 20 years ago. They've gotten bigger. These are made at checkpoints under duress, and they're made very quickly. A football, anything I can tie them together with. They are also reference martyrs. And again, the idea of witness, the same word in Arabic, shaheed, is the same as a martyr. So water witness is also bearing witness to what's happening. This one is paired with rubble from post-war Germany, and then the books of Dr. Tawfiq Kan'an that were published in German. So this is the below, the subterranean, right? The archaeological violence, and he was in correspondence with, I'm sure you know, Gustav Dahlmann. So again, a seminal figure in ethnography and archaeology. And he was a theologian, Orientalist, not a colonialist. There is a distinction. And his position in relationship to Palestine was that to understand it, you had to begin with material history. And so he was in correspondence with Dr. Tawfiq Kan'an. They had different relationships, but they were cordial with one another. So it's really I found all the original books, and I brought them into the exhibition. And you can see Kan'an's work on demonology and the spirit world that I spoke about earlier, all opened in a kind of concrete, poetic way, mimicking also the flight of these birds. And looking at them all are the witnesses from this adjoining room, many of which have these hand-cast horns, which I made from pickaxes that I heated and forged and upturned them. You might recognize that gesture from the bulldozer pieces Ka. Handmade Palestinian pottery, elements of bronze, nylon stockings, and everyday objects. And as you exit the gallery, you see this composition that shows the rooftops unmoving with these kind of murmurations of birds passing in and out of the frame. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nida. I think that it was very important to have you here physically because one of the links that you draw between infrastructure and mythology are actually actualized in all of the conversations that we've started having. So maybe I'm going to start with this first question, which is kind of an expansion of the discussion you were having with Nastasia and Gabriela about witnessing. Because in a way, this last project is only about that. But earlier, you were also talking about the fact that in the Palestinian contemporary experience, there's this metabolizing of destruction and the ephemeral. So I wonder also how you think about this witnessing, which is in itself also being, facing destruction in a way, because maybe there is a limit to this metabolizing of the ephemeral when it comes to the transmission of histories of destruction. I don't know if it makes sense, but...
Well, thank you for the question. It's a great question, and I open it also to the audience to engage with, as it does touch upon a lot of what's been covered so far. But these are figures of persistence and defiance for me, these goddesses. And they emerge from the rubble, they stand, they observe, and they remember, and they transmit, despite everything, right? It's not easy to erase these mythologies, despite the machines that have been engineered to do so. Can I tell us a quick story? Yeah. So at the in the late 1800s, early 19-teens, there was a newspaper called the Palestine Paper. Palestinian editor, Nida Sinnokrot is his name, and there was a column in it called the Peasant Letters. Abu Ibrahim was a peasant that weekly contributed to this column. And he fought passionately, he argued passionately against the Mashah, the commons. So much of the land in Area C is traditionally called Mashah or held in commons. This is also very important to us because it's not just kind of these traditions that regulate land and its use, but also the social relations that guide that distribution, right? So water, for example, in Palestine is not considered a resource, it's considered a relationship. And this is very tightly connected to the mythologies of Al-Ainain, the witness of springs. So he would argue every week, well, look, we have to be competitive. We have to buy into the myth of progress. We have to ensure security in the Crimean Wars and this and that. We have to have an export economy. We can't have a sustenance economy. We have to modernize. We have to enter, the myth of progress. And to do that, we have to get rid of these antiquated customs. We need tractors. We need industrial investment. But why should I invest if in 6 months or 3 months my sister's son is going to inherit the land? The land is passed matrilaterally, right? There's a strong matrilateral kind of heritage in Palestine. And the communities that still have held on to their Mashah, despite Ottoman, despite British, despite Israeli attacks on it, are the strongest matrilateral communities in Palestine. But anyway, so this impassioned argument did not fall on deaf ears. And eventually these ideas took root and people modernized. And land laws were passed and land became private property. The myth. It turns out Abu Ibrahim was not a Palestinian peasant. He was a friend of Isa. His name is Menashe Merovitz. He was a Russian Jewish emigre to Palestine. And they both shared a dream. Again, think about that mimetic image I gave you, right, of the two bulldozers. The idea of development, the myth of development, the tools used in its service, and the refusal that is very palpable and still real, and we can still tap into that. Later they had a falling out. He went on to establish the first Israeli settlement, Gishon LeZion, which was modeled after a European ideal called a Green City. Lebrecht Mige was a German architect who kind of spawned this idea. It failed in German because it was a threat to the state in the Weimar Republic. But his disciples kind of exported this idea. It took root in Palestine. The idea of the garden city, the sustainable city. But that's not a sustainable mythology if it comes at the expense of eradicating everyone else. And in the discussions, and again, you can see the research in my book, there's discussions about, like, this is a city of God, but we can't live with these savages. This kind of thing. So, that's an example of the machine. of the machine that creates these mythologies of oppression.
And what's striking is that now we can see a continuation which is very clear between these machines of progress and the machines of surveillance and the kind of all of the technological development that were used in the destruction and the continuous kind of destruction processes and Nakba, which has occurred since October 2023. I was wondering whether this strategy of Saqiyya, which had, I guess, some efficiency in the very difficult context that you've shown, we see how it's been really surrounded by these settlements. I wonder, has the strategy changed in terms of Saqiyya, and how are you doing today in terms of doing that work? How able are you? How are you still able to continue the same kind of strategy and using art and agriculture and all of those discursive and artistic strategies to do that resistance work?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, so like those amulets, we think of, the aesthetics as protectionism. We can't fight in a traditional sense. And so the Israelis want to take our spring. 93% of the springs in Area C have been taken. And they, the one next door to us, which is maybe the highest output, was taken 2 years ago. How do we protect Ainen? How do we protect her? How to protect the stories that she teaches us, this kind of wisdom, these mythologies? Maybe you can create a moment of awe, something maybe so disarming and so beautiful. This is where these goddesses came to me, right? Maybe I can maybe it just gives you a minute to take shelter in the house, to close the door, because it's scary. Take it from me, every second counts. So that's one strategy. Another strategy is, like I said earlier, we are constantly rebuilding, and this is not a myth of persecution. It's not a Sisyphean myth. This is worship for us. This is devotion. The dry stack stone walls, the mortarless walls that we built that now are renowned across Palestine, which is why Yusuf is so famous now. So we keep rebuilding them, and we build them better every time. Those rubber-coated rocks I showed you in Berlin, 2 crates, when they arrived from Palestine through Israeli customs, every single last piece in them was smashed. And I rebuilt every single one of them, because you can't destroy them. They're made out of garbage and rubble. You resurrect them, and every time they get better. They get stronger.
Maybe we have time for 1 or 2 questions. 1 question, Martin says.
We have 7 seconds. 3, 2.
Sorry, it's a peculiar privilege. That's why I sit in the front row every time. No, thank you so much for that presentation, and I think there's a lot of resonance between your presentation, the ones before, and the ones the day before as well. And I'm really curious because you showed, for example, in one of the past open calls at Saqiyya, that huge program that says infrastructures, and I don't know what infrastructure is called in Arabic. And I'm really curious because even the premise, I think, of your presentation today, to think about mythological infrastructures, in a way, it is very much demonstrating an article of faith, and to think about, I think, faith and that steadfastness of understanding relationship to land as that undergirds, I think, a continual political awareness and groundedness. And I'm really, really curious, maybe, because it returns to material practice, as to what then are the afterlives of rubble, even though they became beautiful, even though they became art. What is that moment, or what is that implication, or what is that economy in which they participate? And were there moments of rupture, of complete impossibilities that you had to confront? Sorry, I hope that was also easy to translate.
Maybe easier to translate than to answer. I mean, so you're asking about ruins, essentially, and we inhabit them. We carry them with us. They are not ruins for us. They are our ancestors, and this is why we love them. Hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Nida. Thank you.